To set some context for the reading this morning, Jesus just found out his cousin, his friend, his mentor, his co-conspirator, the one who danced in his respective womb right along with him in Mary's womb, died inhumanely after an unjust incarceration. His cousin John, who baptized him in the river Jordan and heard the words of blessing as he began his own unconventional ministry, was executed by the empire. Beheaded to honor King Herod's birthday at the request of Herodias' daughter, John's head became a party gift. Herod spared no expense in his hospitality, but his acceptance for anyone threatening his rule was non-existent. Herod eliminated the competition. Herod was in survival mode. It was tragic, shocking, and deeply sad. Jesus did what many of us do when we hear jolting news like this. He sought space to grieve, to think, to cry. Frankly, Jesus just needed to regroup. And in times of loss, we often find ourselves in the night, wrestling, much like Jacob at the Jabbok in Genesis that we heard this morning, grieving, exhausted, and holding fast through the night. Jacob wrestled with the divine, longing for a blessing and asking to see God face to face. Grief feels like that kind of lonely wrestling match. We grapple with the pain, the unanswered questions, the half-goodbyes, and the sheer fatigue of our wounds. And yet it is precisely in those tender, vulnerable moments of wrestling that God meets us. Jesus sought a desolate place to wrestle with his own grief. But what makes this moment so tender is what remains unsaid. After a death, there are sacred rituals, preparing the body, speaking liturgies, praying, singing. What might usually be a public service had to be done in secret because of how and by whom John died. To follow such a tender, heavy moment with a massive gathering seems a bit overwhelming. Faced with sadness, Jesus was in a liminal space. How do you offer compassion when you feel completely depleted? Have you ever felt that way? Amy Victoria Adkins Jones writes in her commentary on this text, quote, Jesus hears the news about John and wants to be alone, a lesson in itself, but his grief does not close off for him the moments of compassion. And when the disciples tell the people they should go and make way for themselves, Jesus insists they remain gathered. Jesus requests the repast, end quote. A meal after death is a time when stories and memories are shared and legacies are conveyed. What did Jesus think when he broke bread and passed it out? Were tears shed? Did people squeeze his arm or his hand as they walked by? Did Jesus eat in silence, or did he participate in conversation? Did someone need to remind Jesus to eat and to drink? They need not go away, Jesus says. You give them something to eat. Our world is swirling in chaos, rhetoric, indecisiveness, fear, and division. How many times have we heard a remnant? This is a deserted place, send them away. The crowd alone is filled with those facing food insecurity, lacking health insurance, or living with inadequate housing, people fleeing their homelands for safe refuge only to get tangled in border nets. This place has nothing, some say. Send the people away. And then, as Don C. Richter writes, stretched to his human limits, Jesus proclaims the goodness of God, makes tangible God's abundance, extravagance, and prodigality. He calls forth more fish than the nets can hold, heals more people than the authorities allow, and forgives more sins than stubborn lips confess. Jesus' miracles are not an in-your-face showcase for divine power. Instead, they herald Jesus' dying and rising, his relinquishment and resurrection. And the miracle invites followers in every age to join him in this way of life. We are invited to eat and to serve. Amid oppressive acts and survival of the fittest tendencies, Jesus craved alone time. The needs were great, the exhaustion was real, and so was the grief. Yet Jesus offered the crowd what came naturally to him, what is freely given: acceptance and love. Acceptance and love stand in direct opposition to the politics of scarcity and fear. Filling the bellies of those who hunger fills the body with hope and possibility. It turns us from merely surviving to truly thriving. And as Doc Hollingsworth writes, there is an ongoing tension here. Big crowds of unmet needs tend to overwhelm our sense of agency. If there had been 6 people following Jesus when it came time to eat, then a disciple might have thought there was something he could do. But a whole crowd of unmet need is something altogether else. Who hasn't been overwhelmed in this time of political and societal unrest? Most Bibles title this story, Jesus feeds the 5,000, even though Jesus gives the food to the disciples first, who then feed the crowd. There's no question that Jesus feeds the multitude. However, this does not reduce our call to passive piety. Our call is active ministry that meets human need. Jesus feeds the 12. The 12 feed the 5,000. We are invited to eat and to serve, even in the midst of our grief and our loss. Hollingsworth also continues to write by saying that Jesus' first command to the disciples was, you give them something to eat. Jesus transforms our humble offerings into more than we could have dreamed. But it's also true that Jesus is calling upon us to dream even bigger. Jesus did not say, give me those fish and that bread and I'll feed them. His first call was for the disciples to change their ideas about their own power in the world, which is to say, we all have power too, in the serving and in the sharing. Jesus chose to thrive in a moment of great loss and grief because there was an abundance of compassion to be shared. In what Atkins Jones calls the theology of repast, those gathered find their fill, a reminder to hold on to hope and a collective call to keep the feast. Like Jacob at Peniel, who emerged from the night of wrestling declaring, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved. We too encountered God's face in these tender moments when we stop running from our grief and look at one another across the shore. God transforms our felt scarcity into abundance, and in feeding one another, we see the face of God in our neighbor. It is easy to slip into survival mode and see only what is missing. But Jesus reminds us that even on the shore of our deepest exhaustion, there is enough to go around. We know what it feels like to be seen, to be heard, and to be fed. We know we are so much better together than apart. They need not go away. Give them something to eat. We know there's enough to go around, and we know we can thrive in God's abundance. Now, if Jesus would have just shared his fish recipe